The hull groaned like something alive and dying, and I knew we had less than 6 hours of air left. My name is Vex, and I served as communications officer on the colony ship Lumen Vale. We were 3 days from the nearest friendly outpost when pirates hit our shield array and tore it open like wet paper. Our reactor was venting radiation into the lower decks. Life support was failing deck by deck, and our own fleet was 3 weeks away. 3 weeks might as well have been 3 centuries. I come from a people called the Ale, and we did not evolve for danger. Our home world was soft and kind, low gravity, no large predators, no wars that lasted longer than a season. We built our civilization on patience and calculation, not survival instinct. So when Captain Loris stood on the bridge and told me to open every emergency channel we had, including the one nobody in our fleet had ever used, my hands froze on the console. That channel belonged to the humans. Every species in known space called them the Deathworlders, and not as a compliment. Their planet was a nightmare by galactic standards. Crushing gravity, deadly weather, predators in the water, and predators on the land, and on top of all that, thousands of years of humans fighting other humans. Children on my world were told stories about human soldiers who did not feel pain the way we did, who did not stop when reason said they should stop. I grew up believing that if a human ship ever answered your call, you had traded one disaster for a worse one. I had personal reasons to believe it too. My older brother served on a supply route years ago that crossed into a contested zone where human mercenaries were operating under a contract that fell apart. He never came home. Nobody ever gave me a clear answer about what happened, only that humans were involved, and that was enough for me. I did not need more detail to build a lifetime of distrust. Captain Loris did not share my hesitation. She was staring at a screen full of dying numbers, and numbers do not care about old grudges. "Vex," she said, her voice sharp and steady despite the chaos around her. "Open the channel now. I do not care who answers. I care that someone does." I opened it. The message went out on every frequency: a plain distress call, our coordinates, our situation, the number of souls on board, 142 civilians, and a crew of 11, most of them families, relocating to a new settlement, half of them children, who had never even seen a starship interior until 3 days ago. I sent it, and then I sat there, watching the counter on our air reserves tick downward, waiting for the silence that I expected to answer us. Silence did not come. 4 minutes. That is how long it took for a response to reach us, and in those 4 minutes I aged more than I had in the last decade. A voice came through, calm, almost bored, like this was a routine grocery run, rather than a rescue call into the heart of what everyone considered dangerous territory. "Lumen Vale, this is the Kestrel, out of the human forward station at Aldwin Reach. We have your position. Do not shut down your reactor containment. We are sending a technician to stabilize it remotely. Estimated arrival, 40 minutes. Hold on, 40 minutes. My own fleet needed 3 weeks. I stared at the console, and something cold moved through my chest that was not relief, not yet. It was dread, dressed up like hope. The captain looked at me and asked what I thought. I told her the truth. I told her that 40 minutes was too fast, that no fleet moved that quickly, unless they were already close, already watching, already positioned like predators near wounded prey. I told her that everything I had ever learned about humans said we should be more afraid of their arrival than of suffocating quietly in the dark. She did not answer me right away. She just kept working the failing systems, buying us minutes we did not have, and I kept my hand near the channel controls in case I needed to cut the connection and take my chances with the dark instead. The 40 minutes felt longer than the 3 weeks would have. I spent that time going through everything I knew about human military doctrine, all of it secondhand, all of it built from fear rather than fact. I remembered old briefings that described human soldiers training from childhood in physical combat, human ships built with redundant systems because their engineers assumed disaster was not a possibility but a certainty. I remembered a diplomat from a neighboring system telling me once that humans did not sleep the way we did, that they could function on almost no rest for days, driven by something in their biology that refused to quit, even when quitting was the sane option. None of it painted a picture of rescue. All of it painted a picture of a species built to survive by outlasting everything around it, including anyone unlucky enough to be standing nearby when the fighting started. At the 30-minute mark, one of the children on the lower deck began crying because the air had grown thin enough to feel. Her name was Alina, 6 years old, traveling with her father to a new settlement neither of them would ever see if this went wrong. I heard her cries through the open comm line to the lower deck, and something in me shifted, quiet and small, but real. Whatever I believed about the Deathworlders, I believed more strongly that Alina deserved to breathe. At the 20-minute mark, our reactor containment failed completely, and the automated systems began the shutdown sequence that would leave every remaining deck without power in under 10 minutes. Then the humans arrived early. Their ship did not glide into view the way our fleet vessels did, smooth and formal, announcing itself with proper diplomatic signals. It came in fast, hard, a shape built for punishment rather than elegance, its hull scarred with the marks of collisions and old repairs that had never been polished away. It looked like a ship that expected trouble and had met it more than once. I felt every instinct in my body scream at me to run, except there was nowhere left to run to. A voice came through immediately, different from the first one, younger, tighter with urgency now that they were close enough to see our condition for themselves. Lumen Vale, this is Callan Reeve, technical officer aboard the Kestrel. We are matching your drift and sending a boarding team to your reactor deck. Do not evacuate the lower decks yet. We need bodies out of the corridors so my people can move fast. Trust me on this one. Trust me. As if trust was something that could be handed over in a single sentence between species that had spent generations avoiding one another out of fear. I watched on the external sensors as 3 small craft detached from the human ship and crossed the distance to our hull in under a minute. They did not wait for docking clamps to align properly. They cut their way in through the outer plating near the reactor deck, an act that would have been considered reckless and violent by any standard I had grown up with, boarding by force rather than by invitation. My hands hovered over the alarm controls, ready to call it an attack. Then I saw what they were carrying, and the alarm died in my throat. Environmental patches, oxygen canisters, portable containment shielding built for exactly this kind of failure. They were not coming to take anything from us. They were coming to give us back the 6 hours we had already lost. I left the bridge against Captain Loris's direct order because I needed to see this with my own eyes rather than through a screen. I made my way down through failing corridors, past frightened families huddled together in the dimming light, until I reached the edge of the reactor deck, where the human team was already working. There were 4 of them in heavy suits, built for hostile environments, moving with a kind of controlled urgency that reminded me less of soldiers and more of people who had done this exact task many times before and knew precisely how many seconds they had to work with. One of them, a woman with short dark hair visible through her open visor, was directing the others while running a diagnostic scanner across the ruptured containment field. She noticed me standing at the edge of the deck, watching, and she did not stop working while she spoke. "You should not be down here. The air quality is bad and getting worse," she said. Her name, stitched onto her suit, read Marin Voss. "I am closing this breach in under 2 minutes. Then we get proper airflow back to this deck. Go help move your people toward the forward sections. We will need the space clear when the second team brings the medical supplies through." I did not move. Not right away. I stared at her hands, steady on the failing systems that our own engineers had refused to approach an hour earlier because the radiation readings were too dangerous. I asked her, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be, why she was risking herself for people her own species called weak and unworthy of serious concern. She looked at me properly for the first time, and there was no anger in her expression, only something that looked almost like tired amusement. "Nobody on my ship called you weak," she said. "We called you people in trouble. That is a different category entirely." The containment breach sealed under her hands a few seconds later, and the reactor deck stabilized enough that the emergency lighting brightened from a dim red to something closer to normal. Somewhere above us, I heard the ship's systems begin recycling breathable air again, and the sound of that recycling was the most beautiful noise I had ever heard. More human craft arrived over the following 20 minutes, and what I witnessed changed something fundamental in how I understood the Deathworlders. Medical teams moved through our corridors carrying stretchers built for frames far smaller and more fragile than a human body, adjusting their equipment on the spot to fit our narrower builds and thinner bones. I watched a man built like a small mountain lift 3 of our elderly passengers at once, cradling them against his chest with a gentleness that seemed impossible, given the raw strength required to carry that much weight through corridors, tilted at odd angles from the earlier collision damage. Alina, the child whose crying I had heard over the comm line, was carried out by a young human medic who talked to her the entire way, using a translation device clipped to his collar, telling her a story about a ship's cat back on his home station to keep her calm while alarms still blared in the background. I do not know if the story was true. I do not think it mattered whether it was true. What mattered was that her crying stopped somewhere around the 3rd sentence of the story, and by the time they reached the evacuation point, she was asking him questions about his homeworld instead of asking where her father was. Her father, it turned out, was 2 decks below, helping a human engineer carry emergency batteries because the engineer's hands were full, and there was no time to wait for someone official to be assigned to the task. Nobody had ordered him to help. He simply saw a need and filled it, the way I imagine the humans themselves had been doing across our ship for the last half hour, without waiting for permission or protocol. By the time full power returned to the Lumen Veil, nearly 2 hours after that first response came through, not a single person on board had been lost. Captain Loris met with the human commander in the forward observation lounge, and I stood at the edge of that meeting as translator, though the humans barely needed one. Their language processors had already adapted to our speech patterns faster than any diplomatic team I had worked with before. The commander introduced herself as Dana Whitfield, and she looked nothing like the mythical warlord I had built in my imagination over decades of secondhand stories. She looked simply tired, the kind of tired that comes from doing hard work well, rather than from cruelty. She listened to Captain Loris thank her, and she waved off most of the gratitude, the way someone waves off praise they consider unnecessary for doing an obvious right thing. I finally asked the question that had been sitting in my chest since the moment their ship appeared on our sensors. I asked her why they came so fast, why an entire fleet response was ready and waiting near a system most species avoided out of caution, why a call from strangers who had spent generations fearing her people was answered without hesitation or demand for payment. She considered the question for a moment before answering, and when she spoke, her voice was quiet, almost private, meant for me rather than for the record Captain Loris was keeping of the meeting. "Where I come from," she said, "waiting too long to help someone gets them killed. We learned that the hard way, over and over, for longer than most of your history books cover. So somewhere along the way, we stopped waiting to be asked nicely, and we stopped calculating whether helping was convenient. We just started showing up. It became who we are before it became a strategy." I told her that the rest of the galaxy called her people Deathworlders, and that the name was meant as a warning, not a compliment. She smiled at that, a tired, honest smile. "We know what they call us," she said. "We stopped minding a long time ago. If being built to survive the worst also means we are the ones who show up when everyone else runs the numbers and decides it is not worth the risk, then I will take that trade every single time." The human fleet stayed only as long as necessary. They repaired what needed repairing, restocked our medical supplies from their own reserves without being asked for anything in return, and checked on every passenger personally before departing. There was no flag planted, no demand for territory, no contract offered with conditions attached. They simply finished the work and prepared to leave as quietly as they had arrived, already moving on toward whatever the next emergency in their patrol route required of them. I stood at the airlock as their boarding teams withdrew, and Marin Voss paused before sealing the connection between our ships. She looked back at me, and there was something almost curious in her expression, like she was trying to read whether the fear I had carried into that first conversation had shifted at all. I told her it had. I told her that everything I had learned my entire life about her people had been built on stories designed to keep us afraid rather than informed, and that watching her hands work on that failing reactor had taught me more truth in 10 minutes than every briefing I had ever studied. She did not seem surprised by that. She told me it happened more often than people expected, that fear travels faster and louder than facts do, and that most species only learn the truth about the Deathworlders after their SOS has already been answered by one of their ships. Before she left, she gave me a small piece of advice that I have carried with me ever since. She said that if I ever wanted to understand a people properly, I should watch what they do when nobody is required to help and there is nothing in it for them. Words are cheap, she said. Actions during a crisis tell you everything. The Kestrel departed our system less than 3 hours after it arrived, moving off toward the dark at a speed that still unsettled something ancient in my instincts. The same instincts that had once told me humans arriving meant danger rather than survival. I stood on the observation deck and watched their scarred, over-armored ship shrink into the distance, and I understood for the first time why that fear had taken root across so many species, over so many generations. It is easy to fear something built for constant danger when you have never seen what that same design is capable of, when it turns its attention toward saving lives instead of ending them. Captain Loris found me still standing there an hour later, staring at empty space where their ship had been. She asked me what I was thinking, and I told her the truth, that I wanted to request reassignment, that I wanted to work on establishing formal contact between our people and the human Concord, not out of fear this time, but out of respect earned honestly through actions, rather than granted through old, tired rumors. She approved the request before the end of that same day. It has been 2 years since the Lumen Veil sent that desperate call out into the dark, uncertain whether anyone would answer, terrified of what it might mean if someone did. I serve now as a liaison between our people and the human Concord, spending my days translating not just language but understanding, trying to replace old fear with the kind of truth I only found by nearly losing everything. I still hear the word Deathworlder used across the galaxy, sometimes as a warning, sometimes as an insult, sometimes still with the same nervous caution I once carried myself. But I have started answering it differently when I hear it now. I tell people that yes, humans came from a world built to kill them 100 different ways before breakfast. And yes, that history shaped them into something the rest of us struggle to fully understand. But I also tell them what I saw with my own eyes on the reactor deck of a dying ship, hands steady against radiation that should have terrified anyone sane, carrying children and elders through failing corridors with more care than urgency required. I tell them about a woman named Maren Voss, who told me that helping people was not a strategy for her people, it was simply who they had become. And I tell them the only part of that story that matters most, that when the Lumen Veil sent its call into the silence between the stars, terrified of what might answer, the Deathworlders came anyway, and they did not come to take anything from us at all. They came because we needed them, and for people built the way they are built, that has always been reason enough.